All right. Good evening, everybody. So tonight's going to be pretty informal. I didn't. It's been a busy week. I haven't had time to prepare a whole lot. Uh, but I want to make sure that I jumped on. For those of you that do come on every week, so super excited to be here. Um, you know, for those of you that are here all the time, be sure put your questions in the comments. I did bounce back to StreamYard this week to test out kind of the differences between the two. So we are just on YouTube tonight and not on Facebook or anything. But yeah, let me know what your questions are in the comments. Uh, really, tonight, I think I'm going to just kind of talk through some personal stories that I've come across over the years and kind of talk through things of transition and kind of what I did early in my career. Um, but that seems to be a hot topic for people. Overall, I think kind of learning how to break into the field is a big thing right now, right? I have a couple people that I'm mentoring, and you know, the biggest question I get from them is how do I break into data engineering? It's so incredibly uh, difficult to find a job, um, and it is right now. I mean, for those of you that are out there that are looking, know that it's not you, right? It is uh, not all you, at least, right? I mean, there could be some aspects about your resume, it could be some aspects about how you're coming across, um, but overall, a lot of people are struggling right now finding a entry level data engineering position. Anytime you're going to have trouble finding an entry level data engineering position, but even a data analyst position or BI engineer or any of those types of entry level type jobs, people are struggling to find. Um, and even get interviews for. A lot of auto rejections. You know, the the um, profession is really seems to be kind of saturated right now. Um, that being said, you know there are definitely things, and I made a short about one of the things today that you could do to differentiate yourself between you and the rest of the crowd, right? And one of those things is just communication, you know, talking to people, understanding how to take something that's super technical and break it down in a way that other people understand what you're talking about. You're going to be working with business analysts, with other project managers, with other stakeholders that don't understand what SQL is, that don't understand what Python is, that don't understand what a workflow is or what ETL is or what any of those things are. Um, and so learning how to communicate what you're doing and how you're doing it in a manner in which other people understand what you're saying is a big deal. Um, keep on seeing people bounce in and out. Um, and so make sure that you are definitely continuing to enhance your communication skills. Um, in addition, for those of you that are entering the workforce, that are, trying to find an entry level position, don't restrain yourself to ETL developer or data engineer or even data analyst. Um, you know, look at the QA positions. That's a great entry um, path into data professions. QA, even DBAs, right? Entry level database administrators. Um, those are great entry level positions to get your feet wet, to learn some, to increase your your background and to really enhance some of your skills and practice some of those skills, and also to communicate and talk to other people in the data professions that you want to eventually attain. Because as a QA person, as a DBA, you're going to be having conversations with data engineers, with data analysts that are needing access to databases for if you're a DBA. For QA, you're going to be having those conversations in stand-ups with other data engineers, with data analysts, with BI analysts, and you're going to get to know those people, and you're going to enhance your network, right? You're going to increase your network. You're going to be able to understand better what they do and how they do it in real world examples and see how that all plays out. I mean, being a QA person, that's a great way to really learn and enhance those skills so that you can get into one of those careers if you're struggling with finding either a data analyst or a data engineer position. um, I know people are bouncing in and out. It makes me wonder if there's something up with my audio. Um, but be like I always say, be sure to ask any questions that you may have. I'm gonna edit this banner. Um, Let me know what questions you have about data engineering. Drop them in the chat. Be sure that you are, for those of you that are working towards, those data engineering positions. Let me know. Let me know what questions you have in the chat. One of the biggest things that I've come across, over the years is um, being adaptable, right? Being flexible and being agile and making sure that you can kind of go with the flow sometimes, right? There's so many times when you're going to get kind of spur of the moment requests that some C-suite person needs some piece of data like right now for a meeting. Maybe not literally right this minute, but maybe in the next day or two. And you're going to have to drop what you're doing and kind of switch paths and get that fire drill done, and then come back to what your project was that you were working on. And so, those are the kinds of things that you need to be able to kind of flex with and adapt to. Um, you know, and I'm working on a video right now, kind of talking about what does that look like when that happens to you? What does it look like when you get a fire drill and you have to get it done like ASAP, and how to maintain the consistency and the maintainability of that project, even though it's something you have to do kind of in a rush, right? Making sure you're doing things like keeping your standards, maintaining your standards of your how you're naming things, how you're naming your columns and your fields and your table names and your views and all that, even though it's a project, a fire drill that has to be done like right now. Because no matter how many times somebody tells you this is a one-time thing, it is not ever a one-time thing. You're Whatever that request is going to come up again, even if it's just, hey, I got this report, it was awesome, I got the data, got exactly what I needed, but I need these other two things with it. Can you rerun it? So it's going to happen again. It's never a one-time ask. Um, and sometimes it's an ask that you'll get now and then you won't get again for 3 months. Sometimes it's it turns into a once a quarter type report. Sometimes it turns into a once a year type report, but 90% of the time it's something that is going to come up again. uh, it's never a one-time thing. um, so uh, but yeah, again, if you have any questions, let me know down in the comments. Happy to go over some things. So when I started in data engineering years and years and years ago, um, I started, and this is a good, I think, good for aspiring data engineers out there to understand kind of what my path was at the beginning. I started out, um, I went to I went to University of Tennessee out of high school, into college, and I was a sports management major, and that is clearly not what I've done with the rest of my life, right? Um, yeah, and had some amazing opportunities in college first time around. Decided after 3 years it wasn't what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, and went into um, the workforce. I started working for a regional telecommunications company in customer service, and quickly worked my way up to customer service help desk. uh, Again, none of what I said so far is a very technical career, right? It was working for a cell phone company, answering phones, talking about customers' bills, and changing their price plans, and that kind of stuff. Taking escalated calls, hearing people scream at me. Those were the situations that I was in, um, before I started into the data path that I ended up in. Um, but when I got into customer service help desk, one of the things that, as help desk, we had to do, because Sarbanes Oxley had just come out. For those of you that don't know, Sarbanes Oxley is kind of the beginning of privacy and of consistency and of needing to have some regulations about how information and financial information at that time for Sarbanes-Oxley is monitored and recorded and consistent. Um, but Sarbanes-Oxley came out. They told us we needed to be able to justify and explain all the adjustments that we did to customers' accounts. And so, as a result, the help desk had to review all the adjustments that the customer service reps did. And so, what what we were given was reams of paper. We were each given like a ream of paper every week of these are all the adjustments that you have to review in between your calls with customer service. And it was one by one. There were probably, I don't know, 75-ish on each page. It was landscape, printed out landscape, all this other information. And we'd pull up the customer's account, review the notes, review the adjustment, make sure that everything matched, provide any feedback back to the coach, and that coach would provide feedback back to the customer service rep. But it was all done by paper. We were writing stuff out. It was insane, right? I was like, we're burning a tree a week here. This is nuts. And so I did the legwork, went out, found out where the data was coming from, talked to some other people in the call center that were running the reports and printing out the reports for us, and tracked them down, understood where the data was coming from. Um, and created a database and created a DTS package that pulled the data from the source and imported it into the database. And that was my first kind of foray into ETL, right? I was extracting data from one source, putting it into a SQL server, and then I just created a quick VB.NET front end so that we could go through and pull up the adjustments. The database would record which one of us were pulling it up and looking at it, and then we would put our notes into that, and then at the end of the week we would have a report that we could send out to the customer service coaches for them to provide feedback to their associates. And that stopped us, it saved the company money because it was more efficient and quicker for us to go through and review the adjustments. We were not wasting the paper and the ink every week. And then once they figured out I could do that, then all of a sudden, I started moving into these projects and into this center analyst career where I was doing those kinds of things for the call center. And so I went from being center analyst to being a working and doing it on my own and being having my own consulting company for a few years, doing website and database um, consulting with small businesses and helping small businesses to kind of learn about data, learn about how to manage their data and how to, if they weren't ready for a full blown um, like data warehouse or anything, then walking them through at least how to organize and manage their data using simple and inexpensive tools like Excel, so that they could at least start to build their kind of their data warehouse, right, using Excel files, and at least how to kind of organize it and make sure that it was in kind of a column or table type format instead of just kind of all over the place, right? And um, I did that. Tried to convince people and understand, get people to understand in 2008, the importance of analytics and how it can help to drive your business forward. So I did that for several years, and that was really exciting. And for those of you that maybe, this was one of my suggestions to one of my mentees this week. For those of you that are looking for a data career, I really think that one of the biggest underserved populations of business are SMBs, right? Our small and medium sized businesses that are out there, your local restaurants, your local retail stores, your little shops that they may not even understand the value of the data that they have there, or that they have that data there that they could use to, push their business further and to get more out of their business, right? So going out and talking to those business owners, those small business owners, those local businesses, and what, even if you are doing it for cheap, you're building your portfolio, you're building your experience, you're getting people uh, excited about data that probably will be able to give you a reference later. And so, or maybe you end up going that consulting route, and you get word of mouth, and all of a sudden one project turns into five projects, and five projects turns into you're the data guy for all the small businesses in your town or your city that you're in. And so for those of you that may be struggling with finding a corporate job, or you're applying for hundreds of roles and just can't find anything right now, there are small businesses out there that don't understand the value of the data that they have in front of them, and probably think that it's too expensive for them to have somebody come in and help them with it. But if you've taken the time to learn SQL, if you've taken the time to understand databases and, at least one visualization tool, Power BI or Looker or Tableau, you can take that skill, take that knowledge, and help those small businesses. And you could probably do it for less than what they're thinking that it would cost, and provide them with probably some money savings or some increased sales that will help to make up for the cost of you coming in and doing that for them. And so going out there and selling yourself in that way, it helps you to increase you're practicing your communication. You are increasing your confidence by attaining those types of positions, those roles, attaining those projects. And those are great examples that you could use in your interviews going forward as well. If you do continue to decide to pursue a corporate career, like I did after 3 years, went back into the corporate world and spent the last uh, 17 years in the corporate world. But and there's upsides and downsides to both. And if again, for those of you that have questions, let me know. uh, Does doing the certifications like Azure, AWS, uh, help? That's a great question, and that's something that we get a lot on these Friday night calls. Um, and I'll say that it really depends. Don't don't seek out certifications for certification's sake. Certifications on their own are not going to get you a position. Um, but if you go out and get like the AWS or the Azure Data Engineer Associate certification, um, that could help to differentiate you from somebody else once you get to the point where you're getting interviews, right? If you, but you need to pair that with some practical experience, whether that be in the form of going out and doing what I was talking about, going out to small businesses and trying to get a project there, or going out to like freelancer or upstart and getting some projects there and getting some practical experience. Mix those two. Don't just go after those certifications, because here's the reality: those cloud certifications are awesome, but unless you're going, there's so many businesses out there that are still on prem. And so a cloud certification will help you in some cases, and in other cases, some businesses might look at that and think that it makes you overqualified for what they're looking for. And the reality is, don't forsake the on-prem stuff for only knowing the cloud stuff. Having a good foundation with SQL is better than going after a certification, a cloud certification. Having a good foundation with understanding data modeling, understanding um, your uh, again SQL, database structure, database execution, modeling, and some analytics are more important than the cloud piece. The cloud piece, Python, those come after your understanding of modeling, data warehousing, and most importantly, SQL. If you don't understand the data piece and SQL, you're never going to get a position. You're just not. Um, Having a good solid understanding of joins and how to communicate that in an interview is a huge thing. You're going to get that join question in every interview that you're in. um, so top 5 skills for data engineering 25 as we go into 2025. Now when we talk top 5, I 100% would include cloud and Python. um, and number one, always going to be SQL. If you don't start with a good, solid foundation in SQL, you're never going to get a job. You're never going to get a job in any data profession. You have to understand SQL, whether you're going into analytics, uh, data scientist, or a data engineer. Good, solid foundation of SQL. Your next piece is going to be that data modeling, data warehousing kind of piece, understanding those concepts, understanding how to model data in an efficient way that is going to be long lasting, that will continue to scale as the data scales, scale well as the data scales, and be efficient. Again, the SQL piece goes hand in hand with that, but that would be number 2. As you start to get into number 3, then you could start looking at the um, other ETL tools that are out there, whether that be having a good solid foundation of the Microsoft stack of SSIS, SSAS, SSRS. There is still plenty of work there, and there's a lot of work taking that stuff and migrating it into the cloud. Ton of work there. But you have to understand those things before you can understand how to migrate them. But some type of ETL tool. So, whether that be the Microsoft stack, whether that be Informatica, Fivetran, some ETL tool, um, in order, that would be the third piece. Um, and, and to identify what that tool is going to be for you, go out and look at the jobs that you're passionate about. Look at the companies that you're passionate about joining and hunt down and find out what ETL tools that they are using. If you don't find them on job posts, find a data person that is works for that company and ping them and ask them and say, "Hey, I'm really interested in working for your company someday. What ETL tool do you use?" Um, there's nothing wrong with that, and most people are gonna respond to you and let you know. Um, and then from there, that once you get a good understanding of ETL tools and ETL, then you could look at cloud stuff, right? Then you could look at your AWS, your Azure, and understand, when you're as you're doing that, understand how migration happens from on-prem into those tools. Understand cost differences between on-prem and cloud tools, and cloud resources. That's but at that fourth step, that's where I would start looking at the cloud certifications, at those cloud skills. And hopefully by that point, after you've hit those other three, you're applying for things all along, right? You're submitting your resumes out all along. You're trying to increase your portfolio. You're trying to find other projects to do. And then once you get the cloud stuff down, then you could look at your Python piece. And when you're looking at Python, you're looking at things like pandas, polars, PySpark, and you're looking at those libraries to understand how they're used practically within that data engineering realm. Um, because when you're talking about Databricks, which is a big piece right now, um, you're going to be using PySpark, right? You're going to be using the Spark libraries. And so understanding how those work with data and how to do joins, group bys, filters, pivots, using those tools, um, how to extract data, how to pull data from APIs using Python. Um, and as you're looking at those ETL tools too, and going back to the on-prem ETL, the on-prem ETL tools, the cloud ETL tools, you're learning them in order to understand how to extract, transform, and load that data. You're doing it in a dynamic way that is portable and reusable, consistent way. You're learning standards along the way. And then, even outside those five things, after you understand those five things, hit those governance things, right? Understand what data standards look like in a lot of businesses. Understand what data governance policies and procedures look like in most businesses, and start to really, understand those things. Thanks, Ashish. Those are some great questions. I appreciate you. Um, so if anybody else has any other questions, be sure to pop them in the chat. I love to talk about those things. And those are, those are the five things for an aspiring data engineer. You have to have SQL. You have to have a good foundation of data warehousing and modeling. You have to have a good foundation of some ETL tools. Once you get a couple under your belt, then those skills become pretty transferable to new ETL tools. Um, that's part of this career, is that you're adaptable and you pick up new tools quickly. Um, and then the cloud piece, and then Python as the fifth thing. But outside those five things, or maybe part of those five things, is Airflow and DBT. Airflow and DBT are becoming a bigger and bigger thing, because they're low cost, low code type things. And from an orchestration point of view, Airflow has become the really the big thing lately. The reality is that you see orchestration being done from Databricks using notebooks, using like a master orchestrator notebook that are running other notebooks that maybe uh, I've seen ADF used as an orchestrator. I've seen, um, you know, Informatica used as an orchestrator. So Airflow is a big thing right now, but you still see a lot of these other orchestrators that are other tools that are being used as orchestrators for pipelines and for ETL. Um, Great questions. Uh, awesome. Thank you very much. So if anybody has any other questions, be sure you pop them in the chat. Love to talk about these things. Um, but yeah, DBT is a big thing too. DBT is really cool. Uh, uh, Great for doing transformations in a kind of a low code, no code type way. But there's a lot of those tools out there. I mean, so much that there's so much you can do within like ADF, and before ADF, like SSIS and stuff too. Where it, a lot of it's click and drag. Microsoft. I've always said that Microsoft does a good job of kind of lowering the bar to entry for some processes. They've always done a good job of kind of making it entry level easy, and then it scales. Right, the more you know, the more you realize you didn't know, and and the further that the more experience you have, the more complex you can make it to adapt to your more complex situations. Uh, just be sure that as you're doing that, um, something that I talked about in the video that I started recording today is, as you're scaling your complexity of your knowledge, be sure that you're documenting all of that information in your code for people that come up behind you. Make sure that you are documenting your SQL, documenting your Python in a manner that the more complex things, the more specialized and kind of workaround type code that you're writing is easy to be picked up by somebody else that comes in behind you. Because, you hear people say all the time, what if you get run over by a bus? Right. And that's kind of the dark end of that spectrum. But eventually there's going to be a time when you want to leave that company or you want to move on into a new role. And you're going to need to be able to hand that off to somebody else that is going to have to pick it up and understand all of it. So as you scale your complexity, as you scale your knowledge, as you're writing more and more complex code, keep that in mind. Make it maintainable, make it readable, make it understandable for yourself, for other people that are coming up behind you that are going to come through the same type of growing pains that you had to go through. Make it so that when somebody else inherits your code from somebody that had inherited it from you, that they understand it, 3 and 4 generations down from being handed off. Because the example I used in my any project ideas to create personal projects for practicing data engineering at home. This is a great question. And I'll say that I mentioned earlier talking about kind of Upwork and freelancer.com. Check out those sites. Upwork, you create a profile for free and you get so many kind of points to bid on projects for free each month. If you could get some projects there, then, that's great to have some practical knowledge like that. But the reality is that they're really hard to get. You're competing with a lot of people because it is a global economy when it comes to that, and they can be difficult to get. But personal projects at home, there's I would pick a data set that you're passionate about, some data that you're excited about, whether that be weather data or that be the Marvel universe or Rick and Morty, or maybe you're interested in the New York taxi system and all of their points of data that they have out there. Find some piece of data that you're really passionate about, really interested in. Um, for me, it was education. When I was working on my master's degree, it was education and understanding standardized test scores. And there's any type of government type data, there's so much of it out there. And you could get at it whether you're using good practical skills that you'll need for data engineering, going out and hitting other APIs, doing web scraping, importing CSV files. Those are all skills that you'll need as a data engineer. Those are all things that you will use. And so identifying something that you're excited about and passionate about, getting that data. And even as a data engineer, even as a aspiring data engineer, you need to understand the analytics piece. A good data engineer understands at least 30% of the other disciplines, because you're going to interact with all of them, whether that be machine learning or, in some cases, depending on the job you have, AI engineers. And, you're definitely going to interact with analysts. So when I say find some data set you're passionate about, do the importing, set up your ETL packages, cleanse your data, go through all those practices and all those hard things, and create some type of visualization at the end. Create some reporting, whether that be Power BI or Looker or Tableau, at the end that you're going to be excited about seeing those results. And even work on some regression analysis or some linear regression and look at, okay, do some predictive analysis and identify, for me, again, with the with the standardized testing, I looked at, for Tennessee and for Mississippi, because they were the two lowest scoring in the country at the, for the data sets that I was looking at. I predicted how much money those states would need in order to raise their standardized test scores so that they weren't at the bottom of the pack when it comes to the United States. And so those type of showing your skills, that you not only can do the technical work of extracting, transforming, and loading that data, but also you understand the data enough that you could create that analysis, will take you a long way in having a good, solid, full scope project that you've done that you can show off. So yeah, it's important because from a data engineering perspective, all the code, all your SQL statements, all your maybe your Python or your ETL pipelines, your workflows, they're all great, but a lot of times what a hiring manager understands is not always the data engineering piece. A hiring manager may have no idea, may not have the technical knowledge or technical skills to understand what you're talking about as from a data engineering perspective. You may answer your more data engineering type questions from a panel of peers that you interview with, or from some technical um, uh, testing that you do as you're applying for the jobs. And the data, but what a hiring manager is going to understand is what is the value to the business. Your ability to translate what you're doing into the value for the business, either through analytics or through understanding the man hours and the money you're saving the company by creating the automation that you're creating, by automatically pulling the data like that. That's what will take you into your career and take you far in your career. I don't see it. So Ashish is asking, is Hadoop and Hive still irrelevant? I honestly don't see a whole lot of Hadoop and Hive. I see a lot of Apache stuff, right? I see a lot of the the Parquet files, and using things like Databricks to import data, um, and writing Python scripts, um, and putting them into Docker containers and putting them into Elastic containers in AWS to run, to do big data and pull data that is in, like S3 buckets or ADLS containers that may be in Parquet type format, but not Hadoop or Hive. I just don't see it a lot. I'd say no. I don't see it on resumes a lot. I don't see it used practically in businesses a lot. So I'd say no. Uh, you may see otherwise. Again, I think that that's one of those things that may see it here and there, but we're talking 5% of resumes, maybe. Just isn't. There was a time in the mid-ish 2010s, like 2015 to 2018, 2020, that it was a big thing. It, since COVID, and not that COVID is one of those things that it's not causation versus correlation, right? It's COVID didn't cause it, but uh, it it's a time point in people's memories. Since 2020, I've not seen Hadoop or Hive used a ton. Um, there's so many big data tools out there that Hadoop and Hive kind of fell by the wayside. Uh, I would, you know, if you've been spending time with Hadoop and Hive, I would take that time and look at things like, um, Kafka, and your things like CDC, and which is change data capture for those of you that may not know, um, and your um, you know real time data stuff, understanding how to push and pull data from service buses, understanding, again, if you don't have a good solid understanding of APIs, understanding, um, how APIs work and how to push and pull data from various APIs. That's where I would spend my time, as opposed to, um, Hadoop or Hive. It just, you don't see it a lot anymore. Great question though. I hate to upset anybody that may have spent some time with Hadoop and Hive. It was exciting, for a few years, but kind of fell out of favor. Um, but again, great questions. Thank you, Ashish. I appreciate it. Um, Let me know if you have any other questions. Pop them in the chat. Uh, you're you're on fire tonight. I appreciate it. Hey, and again, there's still a ton of work out there, um, for migrating, on-prem stuff to the cloud, whether that be migrating SSIS packages into ADF or Fabric, um, or Synapse, or, uh, whether that be migrating, other on-prem, uh, yeah, migrating Informatica Power Center workflows into ICS task flows. Um, that's going to be a big thing coming up over the next several years. Is eventually Informatica is going to tell people that they're not going to provide any more updates to Power Center, and they're going to push people into IICS, which is the, uh, Informatica Intelligent Cloud Services, and that's going to be, for I think for a lot of businesses, I think that that's going to be a pain point over the next couple of few. I I think that, it, And right now, it's not an easy process, and it's going to take a lot of work for some companies to do that migration. It's not going to be. I don't think it's going to be as pretty or as simple as Informatica may make it sound. Um, but I think that that's going to be a big thing over the next few years. So if you're looking for like the next big, super exciting thing that's going to happen or important thing that's going to happen, I think there's a lot of companies out there that are still on Power Center that will eventually be forced all of a sudden. I think it's going to be like an all of a sudden, like, hey, over the next 6 months or 18 months, you have to migrate all your stuff. Um, Kind of push. And I think it's going to be painful for some companies. Uh, but that's my spiel about that. Um, yeah, if you're looking for something that's like going to be hot the next few years, I would look at IICS. Uh, it's a great solution. For companies that are going from on-prem, not using Informatica, um, into the cloud, or if they're just starting their analytics journey. I picked up a recent contract, and um, they're really just starting their analytics journey. They have some software engineers and some software developers that have been doing some like data engineering type work as far as the software side goes, pulling stuff from other systems so that they could use it in their own kind of proprietary software that they create, that they write. But they don't have anything analytics. They just got a Snowflake account. They just got a Informatica ICS account, and they're just starting their journey. And and for that type of situation, then Informatica is going to be great. For those that have Informatica on-prem in the form of Power Center, and they're going to be looking to migrate to ICS, they're going to be needing some specialized skilling, some specialized tool knowledge from their either from their existing workflows or from new people that can help them do that. But that's my soapbox on that. I have a lot of soapboxes. I apologize. My other soapbox is don't hard code stuff into your code. That's just a little side note. But yeah, I think that's going to be a big thing. Because here's the reality is that I think that a lot of companies right now are either thinking or rethinking their cloud strategy because they have found either they've started that migration and they found that the cost of moving to the cloud and being in the cloud is more exorbitant than they thought it was going to be, more costly than if they thought it was going to be. And they have to kind of take a step back, right? And for some companies, they may be on-prem and looking to move to the cloud because, hey, they're all being told, hey, go to the cloud. It's going to be great. It will help your business. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be cheaper. It's going to be better processing. And the reality is that they, especially for mid-sized businesses that may really be considering it, it could be costly. You hear these horror stories of Snowflake bills and Databricks bills that are tens of thousands of dollars, even hundreds of thousands of dollars for a month because somebody ran some super complex process and it got stuck running and running and running and used up all those database units, all those DBUs or all those credits, and all of a sudden they end up with $100,000 bill. And that's terrifying. I think that's been in the news some lately. I think that that's terrifying for some mid-sized businesses that are potentially considering migrating. So the reality is that having somebody that will be aware of what that looks like is going to be important. So, you know, for those of you that are aspiring data engineers that are, even data engineers now in the business, or if you're a, business that may be looking to start your data journey and you're looking at the cloud, be sure that you're weighing, do I have, in some cases, some small businesses especially, you may have they may have the infrastructure already. They may have maybe a server blade that they're running some of their, you know, their computer stuff on, right? All of, some of their systems, and like their point of sale system maybe have, maybe it's just a computer or a couple few computers that they're running their stuff on, and they may have enough infrastructure like that sitting around that they can house something on-prem that's not going to be huge. That's going to fit their needs until they have to scale to the point where it does outgrow that. Um, so considering, do I have the infrastructure now that can support my needs for the next 3 to 5 years, or is it something that I'm going to quickly outgrow this infrastructure? Am I going to start being, importing a terabyte a day of data? Probably not for a small business, right? But for your mid-sized businesses, you might all of a sudden start, as you start importing data, especially from other APIs, from competitor data, from other, QuickBooks, from, you know, um, HubSpot, or whether you're using like LinkedIn ads and all the, your Google Analytics stuff. All of a sudden that data starts growing quickly, and you need a place to put it. Do you have that space on-prem locally that can house that information, that can process that information quickly and efficiently so that you could get reports? Or do you need to go to a cloud resource so that you don't have to spend the extra costs to kind of boost up your infrastructure locally? And those are considerations that you have to make. And how do you make those considerations quickly, efficiently, and effectively is why they would bring in, a data engineering, a data consultant, right? Um, to have that conversation of, okay, this is my kind of data landscape. These are the things that I have out there. These are the things that I would want to look at for the foreseeable future, for the next, 2, 3, 5 years. Um, and then a data consultant, that's been doing it for a while can take a look at that and be like, yeah, you could maybe stay on prem for a little bit for the 5 years. Or I might look at it and be like, this is starting to get big. Looking at your equipment, you really don't have anything that's going to be able to manage this on prem. Cloud might be the way to go. Or you might come up with a hybrid approach, right? You may, for efficiency's sake, keep a on-prem database, or for security's sake, you may keep an on-prem database and then use something like ADF to do the ETL or the LT. So she asks another great question: is the job market for data roles? Hey, Gene, what's up? Sorry, Gene is one of my mentees. Love Gene. Ashish is asking, is the job market for data roles going to be better in 2025? You know, I think everybody's concern is that AI is coming in and getting better and better, and is AI going to suck up some of the data roles that are out there? Um, and everybody's telling you no, right? And I'm telling you no. It's not going to take all of the data analytics jobs. It's not going to take all of the data engineering jobs. Probably not going to take any of the data engineering jobs. Um, not going to take any data scientist jobs. It might suck up some of the work, right? Some of the more menial type work. It might help you. It definitely will help you to be more efficient and quicker in getting some of the basics taken care of. And then kind of ramping up sometimes. But what it's not going to do is take anybody's job. There is so much work out there in all the companies. Um, and so many companies are just now seeing the benefits of having some type of analytics platform. Um, yeah, I think that data roles will continue to. Um, a- and when you say better, I assume that you mean that it's going to be easier to attain data roles. So that might be a bad assumption, and let me know if that is. But I do think that and I had this conversation with Jane earlier this week. It's fourth quarter. It is the end of the year. For some businesses, it's a quiet time between now and the end of the year as far as hiring goes, as far as finance goes, and even as far as people taking off and taking vacations. You know, when I was at AT&T, almost every year, starting from the 15th through the end of the year, it was a ghost town. I mean, nobody was around. There just weren't from a business office perspective, right? Obviously customer service people were probably still there, I'm assuming, but from my point of view, project managers were off. um you know they'd pop in for maybe some stand-ups every now and again once a week to make sure that contractors were still getting stuff done. But you know even COOs, even C-suite people are kind of quiet during this time of year. They're doing their own Christmas thing too, right? And end of the year, New Year's thing. So keep that in mind as you're applying for stuff right now, that you might not realistically not hear anything until the beginning of the year. Um, a- and uh, and like I said, I had this conversation with Gene earlier this week. Um, you may not hear anything until mid January or even mid February. So don't feel bad if you don't hear anything back right away. Understand that it's fourth quarter. Understand that companies are wrapping up end of the year, especially for the majority of companies that have their fiscal end of the year at the actual end of the year. Um, you know, Again, this is a quiet time from the middle of December till the middle of January. From a finance perspective, this is a quiet time. They can't make any big financial decisions right now. Um, a lot of job postings get closed that may have been opened. Some of them do open, but you'll start seeing it ramp up in first quarter again. Um, and it's kind of cyclical, right? That like that, right? You'll see it wrap up in first quarter again, as right now budgets are probably finalized ish, but then they'll be revisited after the end of the year, and maybe adjusted for kind of how the end of the year went for them, for the business. And so keep that in mind. Don't feel bad if you apply for stuff right now and you don't hear anything. Um, yeah, see, thank you, Gene. Gene's saying he's had several that have closed on him in the past week. And those job postings are closing not necessarily because they found somebody for that position, but because the job posting closed because the budget's not there for it, probably until sometime first quarter. Um, so don't feel bad about that. Um, Continue to work on building your portfolio. Continue to think about talking to some small businesses local in your area that might need some help. Think about looking at Upstart and Freelancer and seeing if you could pick up a project. um, but I guarantee you that come first quarter it will open way back up again, and you'll start seeing things move. The other thing that's happening right now between now and middle of February is, for the US, there's a handoff of power, right? From a government perspective, people are trying to figure out, businesses are trying to figure out what they're going to be funded for and what they're not going to be funded for, what types of cuts that they're going to get from the government, as far as what type of tax cuts that they're going to get, what types of things, grants that they may get from the government, depending on the business. And so understanding that for some business, that's why I'm saying come first quarter, a lot of stuff's going to start opening back up. And especially from a data perspective, um, as other projects open back up, they have to have data for it. And so data engineering roles, data analyst roles will start opening back up uh, come first quarter. And I do think that it will continue to grow in 2025. Um, and I think that, you know, I've mentioned this before in some of my other videos, but your ability to adapt and utilize AI in a ethical and secure way um, will help your career. Uh, Learning how to adapt and do that will help your career. And if you have questions about how to do that in an ethical and secure way, let me know in the chat. I'm happy to have that discussion. Um, but yeah, moving to the cloud, and I'll tell you, I've been back in Databricks lately, and after being out of it for about 8 months, and the Genie in Databricks really does a great job of, the AI, it's called Genie in Databricks, but that AI really does a pretty good job of, once you start typing some Python, anticipating based on the previous code in your notebook what you're gonna want from it. Um, it's not 100% right. I wouldn't even say that it's 60% right, but I would say half of the time, I'd say 80% of the time, it gets you 60% of the way there. Um, Very rarely is it just right, and you don't have to change and adjust something. But um, there's so many tools now where AI is integrated in it. Um, Being able to utilize AI and um, and again be ethical and secure with it is going to be I think, going to be a big thing going into 2025. Um, what resources do you recommend to practice building and learning data engineering projects? Um, Great question, Belkar. Um, you know, I would say I love. hmm, I'm going to go two different perspectives. One is I love Databricks. Databricks is awesome because you could use Python, you could use SQL, you could use Scala, all within the same notebook, just in your different, um, you know, different windows of your notebook, different tasks in your notebook. Um, so I love Databricks. Databricks also has Delta Lake, um, and I like that pattern. I like being able to write Python to pull data from APIs, to get it into Parquet files, to dump it into um, Delta Lake, to dump it into like an ADLS, and then to put it into the tables in Delta Lake, um, and kind of use that medallion model. Um, and that's a pretty standard pattern. That's a pattern people are picking up. The other pattern, that is good for practice, especially from a inexpensive um, or even free standpoint, is um, download a SQL Server. Um, you get SQL Server Express for free, right? Download SQL Server, go out and get an Azure subscription, create an ADF resource, download the integrated runtime to your compute the local integrated runtime to your computer, so that you can connect to your local SQL server and then practice creating pipelines in ADF. If you're not, as long as you are careful about how much data you're using there, and how much processing you're doing there with your pipelines that you're creating, then you'll stay underneath the free tier. and you won't have to worry about cost. In addition, you get $300, $200 or $300 when you start up a Azure subscription to kind of play with if you don't already have one. Um, but that, I mean, ADF um, is a good tool to practice with, because the reality is that creating an ADF pipeline is the same as creating a pipeline in Synapse, is really the same as creating a pipeline in Fabric. That's transferable across those kind of platforms. And those are all, if you don't know, those are, ADF is Azure Data Factory. Synapse is, you'll see it as Azure Synapse Analytics. It's just a different resource that is a little bit kind of, I always refer to it as the evolution of ADF. ADF kind of became Synapse, Synapse became Fabric, and with each step, more and more things got integrated into that resource and kind of made that resource container a little bit bigger with more things in it. But learning how to create those pipelines in ADF is again a transferable skill across those three things. So that's a good thing to practice with. In addition, if you have that on-prem SQL server, you could practice writing Python scripts, right? You could install Python locally on your computer. You could install Visual Studio Code on your local computer. And I personally, instead of SSMS, personally like Azure Data Studio to use for my connection to my SQL servers. Because it can, 88 SSMS does this too. For those of you that don't know, SSMS is SQL Server Management Studio. Azure Data Studio, you'll see it as abbreviated as ADS. But ADS is kind of similar to Visual Studio Code for those of you that have used that you could download and install extensions that enhance the capabilities of Data Studio. Yeah, Gene's saying he's really starting to like Azure Studio. I like it because there's so many extensions that you could download for it. And again, for those of you that don't use Visual Studio Code already, go get Visual Studio Code. It's something you're going to use as a data engineer. Almost every company will use Visual Studio Code as their kind of their IDE. It's not an IDE, right? But they'll use it as their IDE. And it integrates fairly well with Git. So yeah, unless they're a big Databricks shop, they probably are using Visual Studio Code for stuff. Balcar is asking about Python. How much Python do you recommend to know before starting to focus on PySpark? Same with SQL. How much raw language skills do you need do you think a data engineer should know? So I've said this before, I'll say it again. Focus on your SQL foundation first. If you don't already have some programming background, especially, focus on SQL first. It's going to make your Python journey a lot easier. And the reality is that if you don't have a good foundation of SQL, you're not going to get a data position. It's just not going to happen. Focus on getting good, solid SQL foundational skills. Understand joins, understand the flow, both the written flow as well as the execution flow of how SQL scripts get processed, because those are two different things. Understand window functions, understand CTEs and subqueries. Once you understand aggregations, once you get a good foundation and a little bit of intermediate down, then you could start moving the Python, if that's the direction you want to go in. And from a Python standpoint, I would understand things like Beautiful Soup and either polars or pandas, and start practicing with those before you move into PySpark. The reality is, like, for um, you'd use like Selenium and Beautiful Soap to get do web scraping and stuff. And I would use those, practice some web scraping. It's a good Python practice. You're not probably not going to do a whole lot of web scraping as a data engineer. Um, I do it very, very rarely, honestly, but it's a good way to learn Python. Um, it's a good way to understand loops, and because you have to kind of loop through things like that. But then move on to pandas and polars, which you will use those types of things. Um, Pandas and polars are very transferable skills that you could use as you start moving into PySpark, right? But those are the kind of the things that I would start understanding data structures, what the difference between a tuple and a dictionary and a list are, right? Understand and a set, and understanding what they are and how to construct those things, understanding the difference between those and a data frame, understanding how to create data frames, how to manipulate data frames, how to join data frames, how to filter data frames, all those types of things. Um, Once you get a good foundation of your data structures, and you could pick pandas or polars. I like polars. Polars has um, was constructed with Rust, and you could look up what Rust is, but um, polars is more like PySpark than pandas is. The reality is that all three, from a data frame perspective, are super similar, and so those skills are pretty transferable between the three. Similar to SQL, between the three libraries, similar to the way SQL is different from Oracle to Postgres to SQL Server. It Syntax may be a little different in how things are set up. Obviously, the wording for the actual functions can be different, but the concepts are the same, and so they're transferable between the three. But I would start there, because locally you could do a ton with polars, Polar's library, with the requests. Request library is a big one, right? Because so much of your job as a data engineer um, is pulling data from APIs, depending on the job. Um, I've definitely had jobs where like 80% of what I was doing was pulling data from APIs. So the request library is an important thing. Again, pandas, polars, practice pulling data from APIs, putting them into data frames, doing some data cleaning, some data cleansing with either pandas or polars, doing some exploratory data analysis with pandas and polars. Excuse me. Um, there are some, sorry, there are some great functions within pandas and polars to describe the data frame, so that you can do some EDA, some exploratory data analysis, as you're pulling new data, and kind of see how whole your data is, see, what data types are in that result that comes back, things like that. So that's where I would start from a Python perspective, and then move into PySpark after you have a good foundation there. If you have a good foundation with data frames and with the request library, and again, either pandas or polars, you'll find PySpark pretty easy in comparison, um, especially for what you'll be doing with it. But PySpark's super important. Don't As you're doing your Python studies, to Balkar's point here, don't neglect PySpark, because it is a big part of what you'll use, especially if you move into a position where you're going to be using Databricks. Top 3 Python libraries: PySpark, requests, and the third one depends on the cloud technology that you're using. If it's an Azure shop, then it's going to be the Azure libraries from there. Azure Service Bus, Azure storage containers, um, so on and so forth. If you're an AWS shop, then it's going to be Boto 3, right? Boto 3 is the AWS library. So though it depends on the uh, yeah, Azure. There's a ton of Azure libraries out there, and they're kind of broken up a little bit more than the AWS libraries, but yeah, the Azure libraries are requests, PySpark, and then for Azure the Azure libraries, and it depends on what type of shop that you're in. Like right now, one of my contracts, I'm using a lot of the Azure Service Bus stuff because the way that that company pushes and pulls data is via Service Bus. Information's coming in from IoT devices via Service Bus, and we're pushing out messages back to the Service Bus that distributes that data into some other databases. And so that's one of the um, patterns that I'm using right now. But the storage accounts gets heavily used, and all it really all the Azure libraries there. If you have that, so Gene has the 203. I think Gene. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I'm pretty sure Gene has the 203. He has the Azure Data Engineer certification. Pretty sure that's 203. And so I think that I think if I were going for a new cert right now, I would probably lean towards like the 600, right? The Fabric one. Um, just because it's the new cool thing. And uh, keep in mind that Fabric has been GA'd for not quite a year yet. And so it's new. It's the evolution of for Azure, for Microsoft, it's that evolution of ADF to Synapse to Fabric. Um, and so I would lean towards the 600 right now, just because of that. Um, Not that the DB203 is not good. Um, I think that there's still a big market for that. If you're a cert person, person really going after some certifications. Again, make sure that you're not when you're doing that, you're not neglecting the SQL piece. But my recommendation would be, yeah, Gene confirms he does have the 203, and I'll tell you that that cert alone isn't going to get you interviews, um, but it'll help. I think once you get to that, it'll help to differentiate you from others once you get into an interview position. Um, Between SnowPro versus 203. uh, oh, cool. Okay, so you took the DP 600 preset. Cool. Uh, it I I like I like Snowflake. Um, my newest contract is working with um, ICS and Snowflake. I'm super excited about it, and it is I like Snowflake, and so if you have the opportunity to take one of the Snowflake certs, a lot of there's a fair market share that Snowflake has, and if you already have the Databricks one, you know companies either have Databricks or Snowflake. They don't usually have both. Um, Again, it depends on the industry, the business that you want to get into. Um, if you already have that uh, Azure background and you've got the Databricks piece, I mean, Snowflake's not a bad way to go. it'll round out kind of that end of what you're looking at. Um, but yeah, Snowpro might be the way to go between those two. The only so again, it's companies either have Databricks or Snowflake. Uh, yeah, and so I would the 203 might. I mean, if you've got the 600, I wouldn't worry about the 203. I would focus on the Snow Pro and show that you have that skill. Especially if you have been in Snowflake and you like Snowflake, um, I would focus on that. Personal opinion. uh, Find a boss of data engineering certain stack. I like that. Um, that's great. Um, there's that's the thing, right? Is that let me start with this question. Where are you at? Are you already like a data analyst or any type of data position, or are you just trying to it just are you still trying to get into the profession at all? Um, because that makes a difference. If I Because I would say if you're already in some type of data position, um, then I would think put my director hat on here. But from a director standpoint, um, oh, so you're okay. So you're entry level data engineer already, a year into it. Um, I I think you're gaining knowledge, you're gaining skills in a practical environment. It sounds like you already have a couple certifications under your belt. Maybe get that Snow Pro cert to kind of round out some of your knowledge to show that you can take what you have with Azure and also use it within um, Snowflake. Um, Maybe the thing is that the certs alone aren't going to get you there, right? It's going to be your communication skills. It's going to be your leadership skills. Um, and not leadership like you want to be somebody's boss one day or anything like that, or that you even want to be in some type of lead position, but rather that you can vocalize your ideas and your thoughts in a way that you not only get people to understand what you're saying, but you kind of move people onto your side about how you want to do things. Um, and being personable. Those are the things that's going to make a difference when you get into that interview stage. Um, and you're, and I'll say that I said this on one of my early videos that I did too, is Azure continues to have like just globally like 70% of um of job recs. So it's not just in Canada. Uh yeah, so many companies, especially when you're talking about like corporations. So many bigger companies are Azure. I mean, Marcus that's Microsoft's big thing. Um so yeah. Um Kind of the okay, so Final Boss data engineering cert stack. There is a um, Azure like solution designer or something like that. There, maybe the architect. There's an Azure Architect cert. What is it? 900. Um, and if you've already got the 600, like I wouldn't go after the 600 and the 203. You could. I don't know that I'd waste my time or my money. You've got the Databricks one. You've got the Fabric one. Go after the 900 maybe, and you kind of round out that Azure stack, right? You've got the data engineer from a perspective of Fabric. You've got the Databricks piece. You get the architect piece, and you show that not only can you do the ETL and manage the data and write Python because you understand Databricks, and you maybe understand medallion architecture because you have those different cloud concepts. And then you stack on top of that the architect, which will kind of further deepen that that cloud architecture and medallion architecture kind of concept. And that really rounds out that whole Azure stack, and you could do all the things, right? And you know, being able to do all the things is kind of a double-edged sword, because it's cool that you can do all the things, and companies like, ooh, if we hire them, then maybe we don't have to hire these other people too, and then you get a bunch of work. So there is that. But so maybe you go after the 900 to answer your question about kind of the final boss of data certs. If you've stacked the others already, I would go after the architect one. That's personal opinion. Like if I saw that on a resume, like I'd be like, I want to interview this guy, right? Or this girl. I mean, obviously, but I want to interview this person. So yeah, I would round it out with the architect one. Since you have all those others, you got the 600. You'd always kind of circle back to the 203 if you want, but that's my opinion. Go after the 900. Go after the architect, especially if you have a year already under your belt. Go after the 900. Especially now, I guess it depends on what your career aspirations are. From my perspective, I like the architect, because when I think of a data engineer's career progression, usually it's that direction. Sometimes a data engineer wants to be a data scientist. It depends how much analyst is in you, right? Do you have a lot of analysts in you? Do you want to be a scientist, or do you have a lot of engineer in you and you want to be an architect? That would be my only split there. Is there a data scientist certification? I knew there was an architect one, but yeah. What is it? Trying to find out what the number is for the scientist one. Just this data scientist. DP 100? Really? I guess it's DP 100. But oh, there you are. DP 100 is scientist one. Yeah. Architect is the 305. I did see an architect one that was 900. Um, browse credentials. Uh, Azure. Yeah. Oh, AZ 900 is the certification you prep. You're right. You're right. The A305 is the architect. Um, thanks for setting me straight, guys. Yeah. So I'd go after the architect. That again, it depends. If you want to be a scientist, do the scientist one, and if that's the ultimate direction you want to go, um, if I'm a hiring manager, if as a director, I would have and looking for a data engineer, I would have picked the person that had the architect certification over the person that had the data scientist certification for an engineer position. Um, hopefully that clears that up. Great questions tonight, guys. Thanks for hanging out with me. Um, well, do y'all have any other questions tonight? It's been a great conversation. Thanks. You're welcome. Well, it is 11:30 my time, just over past 11:30 my time. So I'm going to wrap it up here. But again, thank you all for joining. I've really enjoyed this conversation tonight. Belkar, I appreciate you jumping on. Gene, always appreciate you jumping on and hanging out with me. So again, reach out to me. Let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to shoot me an email if anything comes up. Happy to answer anything. But I will, other than that, I'll talk to y'all again next week. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, guys.